It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 edition of the Congressional Black Caucus Annual Legislative Conference's Braintrust on Environmental Justice. It has been an honor for me to host this for the past several years. We do so with the full understanding that when it comes to the environment, so much of it is due in large measure to our own making. I want to thank the Medical University of South Carolina for the role it has played in helping us to get the message out, as well as the South Carolina Educational Television Network for their assistance over the years. All of this made possible by Dr. David Rivers at the Medical University of South Carolina. David has been the backbone of this effort for many, many years. And he's been assisted by Melissa Dowling, who has been with us from the very, very beginning. The two of them have worked together to make me look like I know what I'm talking about when it comes to environmental justice. So I want to thank them very, very much. Now, we are going to hear today from one of my close personal friends who served with me here in the Congress for 10 years. He's now in the White House as a senior advisor to the President of the United States. He knows this issue very, very well. In fact, he represented the state of Louisiana, which is the state that first got me real interested in what was going on as it relates to the environment. It was an issue involving a chemical plant in Louisiana that first pricked my consciousness. And I'm pleased at this moment to welcome and introduce the Honorable Cedric Richmond, who will speak to us in his own way.
Thank you to my good friend, mentor, and colleague, Congressman Jim Clyburn, for the introduction and having me join you all today. As former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, it is an honor to be joining you all here today at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's virtual 2021 Annual Legislative Conference, and to witness the Congressional Black Caucus continue to excel under Congresswoman Joyce Beatty's leadership. I wish we could all be together in person, but I am thankful the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation is prioritizing health and public safety by making this conference virtual. When Congressman Clyburn asked me to give remarks at the Environmental Justice Braintrust, I immediately agreed. In my career as a state representative and congressman of New Orleans, Louisiana, I have witnessed firsthand the impact of environmental inequalities following the aftermath of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and the coastal flooding throughout Louisiana as a result of climate change. The connection between environmental inequality and health disparities are undeniable. And in this past year of COVID pandemic, we have witnessed the impact of it with Black and brown people dying at disproportionate rates from COVID-19 in comparison to other races. Addressing environmental justice is a crucial aspect in the fight to eradicate health disparities. Now, going all the way back for more than a year now, President Biden has identified 4 existential threats facing our nation: the COVID pandemic, the accompanying economic crisis, the moment of reckoning that we are having as a nation on race, driven forward by the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many young men and women of color, and the climate crisis. Environmental justice sits at the intersection of all 4 crises. For what greater example could we find of environmental injustice than the disparity in health outcomes from COVID. Both President Biden and Vice President Harris are deeply invested in rooting out injustices all across this land, including environmental injustice. Their approach to environmental justice, and I've heard them each say this, are rooted in the understanding of two fundamental truths. First, that everyone has a fundamental right to breathe clean air and drink clean water. And second, that for too many Americans, we failed as a nation to fulfill those basic rights, and too often the people we've let down have looked like us. Righting historic, multi-generational wrongs isn't going to happen overnight, and nobody thinks it's going to be easy. But we have a plan. That plan starts with a simple concept. We've got to listen to and empower community voices. Environmental justice leaders informed every step of the president's plan to address environmental justice. He met with a group of national leaders on environmental justice over a year ago, and he asked for their help. He told them that if we were going to get it right, we needed their input and advice. And they agreed and provided it. So he created the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Its job is to advise the president. He's also created a new role. For the first time ever, the White House has a senior director for environmental justice, Dr. Cecilia Martinez, and she comes out of the environmental justice movement. He's made a bold commitment that we're calling Justice 40. Justice 40 is our commitment that 40% of every dollar invested in clean energy spending, and we're hoping that's a very big piece of a very large pie, because we're going to need to invest a lot in clean energy in order to do what we need to do to reverse the climate crisis, will ultimately benefit disadvantaged communities. Just a few weeks ago, we unveiled our interim guidance on Justice 40. This included 21 pilot programs in agencies across the federal family, suggested by the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where we can begin immediately directing investments to benefit disadvantaged communities. We know that we can't get it right if we can't track and measure our progress. There are lots of ways that we're committed to doing that. The American Rescue Plan included millions of dollars for air quality monitoring. Most of the legislative work on climate and environmental justice is still to come. As the president says, in Washington, they call it reconciliation. We just call it building back better. And climate is at the heart of that commitment. But we're making progress. The bipartisan infrastructure deal that includes landmark funding to remove 100% of all lead drinking water service lines in our nation. This, as we all know, will be a major step toward righting the historic wrongs and helping our communities. I've already talked about how we need to build back better. We cannot do that if we do not commit to build back fairer. What are the jobs of the future going to look like? That's a question we've asked ourselves, and that I'm sure you all are asking as well. One of the core pillars of our climate change investment in the Build Back Better plan is to create a civilian climate corps. This CCC, modeled in some ways after a core program in the New Deal, but learning from the lessons of the past and committed to a fairer future, will be focused on equity. It will employ people from our communities, offering training and new skills to start new careers, helping to protect our communities from the dangers of living in a world that is already suffering the effects of climate change. This includes resilience programs in coastal areas like my home of Louisiana, and it includes helping to protect us from wildfires and the worsening cycle of drought and flooding that is impacting our agricultural areas. We're going to put hundreds of thousands of people to work mitigating the risk caused by climate emergency. And we're going to solve the root problem of climate change by attacking it head on by providing powerful incentives for adoption of clean energy and pushing our country towards our national goal of net zero by 2050, with huge emissions reductions this decade. Addressing climate change does not only impact the current generations, but also future generations and the children of the nation who will inherit this earth. But climate change is not the only issue impacting future generations. For too many Americans, including students of color, students from low-income families, and other underserved students. The promise of a high-quality education has gone unfulfilled for generations. Consistent with the President's executive order on advancing racial equity, we are committed to advancing educational equity for every child so that schools and students not only recover from the pandemic, but build back better. This includes an historic $20 billion investment in high-poverty Title I schools and funding transformational investments to support the needs of the whole child, including community schools that provide wraparound services like after-school programs and hiring more counselors, social workers, and school psychologists. As a graduate of Morehouse College, I understand the value of HBCUs and minority-serving institutions. The Build Back Better plan makes an education beyond high school more affordable and accessible by providing 2 years of free community college and by making college more affordable for low and middle income students at historically black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, and other universities that serve minority-serving populations. President Biden is also calling on Congress to significantly increase investments in American workforce development. This includes registered apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships and strengthening the pipeline for more women and people of color to access these opportunities through successful pre-apprenticeship programs. It also includes sector-based training investments, which will provide millions of workers, particularly young workers, women, and workers of color, with pathways into high-quality sectors, including clean energy, manufacturing, and infrastructure. This will ensure these underserved groups have greater access to new infrastructure jobs. And infrastructure is another essential part of building a more equal and racial justice in our nation. Only a month ago, the President stood with Democrats and Republicans at the White House to announce the bipartisan infrastructure deal. The President and President Biden believes we must invest in our country and communities of color by creating good jobs, improving public health and resources, and sustaining equitable economic growth for decades to come. The infrastructure deal, along with his Build Back Better agenda, will deliver progress towards this vision for working families across the country. The infrastructure deal includes investments that will take critical steps in advancing equity and racial justice throughout our economy, making our economy more fair, equitable, and just. This historic deal also ensures every American has access to reliable, high-speed internet with a historic investment in broadband infrastructure deployment, helping lower prices for internet service and helping all Americans do their jobs, equally participate in school, access health care, and stay connected. Black families are 9% less likely to have a high-speed internet than their white peers, and Latino Americans are 15% less likely. The deal will help close the digital racial divide once and for all. The Biden administration is tackling climate change, environmental injustice, education, and infrastructure. President Biden and Vice President Harris are committed to addressing racial equity in each of these issues and ensuring our nation is a just one. On behalf of the Biden administration, thank you for allowing me to address you all today. With that, I hand it off to our exceptional panelists to introduce themselves and talk more on these important issues. Welcome Dr. Melinda Downing, the Honorable Harold Mitchell, and Mr. Derek Watchman.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our panelists for today, one of whom I've mentioned already, Dr. Melissa Dowling. Dr. Dowling has been with the United States Department of Energy for several years now, and she has been working on the issue of environmental justice throughout her entire career. I want to thank her for being here with us today. Our second panelist is also a longtime friend, the Honorable Harold Mitchell, Jr. Harold Mitchell served in the South Carolina legislature for several years, but today he is devoting all of his energy to the issue of environmental justice. Regenesis up in Spartanburg is another entity that I've worked with over the years to try and get this issue of environmental justice on the forefront of everybody's consciousness. And from the very beginning, I've been working with our third panelist, Mr. Derek Watchman. Now, Derek Watchman is with the Sagebrush Hill Group. I've known Derek ever since we started this brain trust, and he has been an integral part of all that we've done to keep it going. And so I want to thank him as well. So this group that you'll hear from today are people who have been involved for a long time in this issue. And I want to thank them for continuing to commit themselves to helping us discuss this subject and keeping us current as it relates to what we can do to improve the environment and do so in a way that's fair and equitable to everybody.
Good afternoon. I am Melinda Downing. I serve as the Department of Energy's Environmental Justice Program Manager. I want to thank Congressman Clyburn and the Congressional Black Caucus for giving the Department of Energy the opportunity to be a part of this year's annual Environmental Justice Braintrust. It is a pleasure to be a part of this prestigious panel. I will talk briefly about environmental justice at the Department of Energy. While we know there were many notable movements in environmental and health conditions that became the forefront of environmental justice, by many accounts, the EJ movement began in 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina, a county cited to host a hazardous waste landfill. Studies completed by the General Accounting Office, the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice, Dr. Bob Bullock's Dumping in Dixie, further validated the evidence of environmental racism. So what is environmental justice? The answer is grounded in equitable treatment for all. Even though everyone deserves to live, work, and thrive in a healthy environment, not all of us do. Environmental justice aims to ensure that government policies distribute the burden of environmental impacts, such as where to locate toxic landfills, among all groups equally. On February 11, 1994, President William J. Clinton signed Executive Order 12898, directing each federal agency to develop an agency-wide environmental justice strategy that identifies and addresses disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental effects of its programs, policies, and activities on minority populations and low-income populations. On January 25th of this year, President Joseph R. Biden signed Executive Order 13985, advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, which states that the government's objective is to promote equity, to provide everyone the chance to achieve their full potential. Each agency must examine, in accordance with these goals, whether its programs and policies maintain structural obstacles to opportunities and benefits for persons of color and other underserved groups, and to what extent. This executive order was followed 2 days later with Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. This policy stated in this order is to secure an equitable economic future. The United States must ensure that environmental and economic justice are key considerations in how we govern. This executive order also created with the Executive Office of the President a White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. The Department of Energy is a member of this council. Clearly, with the support of this new administration and Department of Energy Secretary Granholm's commitment, underrepresented communities will be at the forefront of environmental justice. Through the policies set in these executive orders, DOE continually assesses the quality of its services to the public and seeks ways to improve performance. Goals and activities are based on clear priorities and tangible benefits that consider programmatic, legislative, and regulatory responsibilities, and emphasize community participation, empowerment, and stakeholder involvement. In addition, they encourage new approaches to occupational and environmental science, research for high-risk communities and workers, embrace interagency coordination to facilitate EJ, and heighten manager and staff sensitivity to EJ throughout the department. The department is committed to achieving EJ and strives to create opportunities to improve the environment and human health in all communities in which DOE works, while ensuring that no population suffers a disproportionate share of adverse environmental effects. The department continues to deliver innovative and transformative scientific and technological solutions to energy, security, economic, and environmental challenges facing the United States in the 21st century. By using the best practices of the more established programs, we continue to seek new ways to implement and advance our overall EJ goals. Environmental justice takes many forms, including equal access to affordable housing, the right to live in a home free of poisonous lead-based paint, and the ability to walk outside without breathing in toxic fumes. Time and again, however, people of color take the biggest hit from negative environmental policies. In other words, they are disproportionately likely to experience health disparities, unfair, race-based negative health outcomes. Consider a few facts about health disparities in people of color from the American Public Association. In 2016, African American children and children of Puerto Rican descent were about twice as likely to experience complications from asthma as white children. More than 11% of African American children and 4% of Hispanic children get lead poisoning from their environment, compared to 2.3 white children. That is just some of the history. The question rises, how are we implementing the executive orders and our agency strategies at the present time? To reinforce DOE's commitment to environmental justice, on August 4, 2011, the department joined 16 other executive branch agencies in signing a memorandum of understanding on environmental justice. This MOU was an important step in furthering the administration's commitment to ensuring healthy communities for all Americans. The MOU advances federal agencies' responsibilities. Specific new areas of focus include strengthening EJ efforts under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Department of Energy strategy is updated every 5 years in coordination with our 5-year implementation plan. The EJ strategy and 5-year plan provides a roadmap for our goals and objectives and highlights our major priorities for the next 5 years and is reflected in individual program plans. We manage a diverse set of activities to ensure that EJ is embraced throughout the department. Our commitment is evident through the following actions. We offer environmental justice online and face-to-face training to employees and contractors. We assist several community capacity building, education, and public participation projects to increase the awareness and ability to support EJ programs across the country. As a scientific agency, DOE advances the adoption of EJ practices by informing current and future government and community leaders, arming them with the skills, technical expertise, and resources to successfully execute desired initiatives and involve the affected communities and public and private partners in decision-making. DOE partners with other federal agencies, the Congress, academic institutions, and non-governmental organizations. As a member of the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, we're engaged in several successful joint projects. A few of those are the weatherization program that improves energy efficiency in low-income homes, the environmental cleanup, which seeks to include the public and stakeholders in cleanup of their communities. We maintain 11 technical assistance cooperative agreements with tribal nations. The department shares our science capacity by facilitating educational opportunities through education and internships. Each year, the department sponsors the National Environmental Justice Conference and Training Program. The event is a gathering of leaders who have come together to engage communities as full partners in collaborative solutions to the many major issues and challenges affecting the nation today. We have a dedicated tribal energy office charged by Congress to assist tribal nations with energy development, capacity building, energy costs, and electrification of Indian lands and homes. Our Office of Congressional and Intergovernmental Affairs promotes energy policies, program, and initiatives through liaison communications with Congress, state, tribal, city, and county government, and other federal agencies, stakeholders, and the public. Our Office of General Counsel, Joint DOE Contractor Environmental Attorneys Training provides training to over 50 lawyers throughout the DOE complex who are in a position to advise decision makers on compliance with environmental justice and the executive order. My first experience, I recall an attorney stating that he had practiced environmental law for 30 years, and this training was the first time he had heard of environmental justice. This is a true example of why training is key to education and awareness for environmental justice for all. Climate change adaptation. By reducing its own greenhouse gas emissions while continuing to develop and deploy new clean energy technologies, DOE will help mitigate climate change. Asset Revitalization Initiative, ARI. This initiative supports local communities and potentially also enhances their resilience. ARI encourages redevelopment and economic diversity in DOE impacted communities. We have EJ mandatory first-time supervisory training. All DOE first-time supervisors are required to take EJ training. Employees must be aware of what EJ is and how to integrate it into their daily activities. We are highly active in interagency activities, including urban waters and livable communities, Title VI and the National Environmental Policy Work Group, the National Health Disparities Annual Conference, and of course, the Congressional Black Caucus Environmental Justice Braintrust. In addition, the department has the expertise of the Citizens Advisory Boards, the CABs, who make recommendations on cleanup around DOE sites. One of our key community collaborations is the partnership DOE has with the Medical University of South Carolina, the Community Leaders Institute, called the CLIs. They started out in South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee, but due to the success in the southeastern part of the country near DOE sites, management recommended we enhance the CLIs and reach out to Native Americans and Indian country. We have held CLIs in New Mexico, Arizona, and we recently reached out to Alaska Natives. The CLIs began with rural and small towns with populations around 50, and we are now up to sometimes 300 participants. The CLIs emphasize the unique relationship between environmental protection, human health, environmental justice, and economic development. MUSC convenes a CLI with federal, state, and local government representation and others based on the subject matter. While several agencies participate as experts, the Environmental Protection Agency is a formal partner in the role of government for each CLI. We work with Black historically colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, tribal colleges, and other minority serving institutions, such as Tennessee State University, who leads the Capacity Building Technology Initiative, creating and supporting community technology centers and providing technical assistance to underserved communities. DOE, in conjunction with the Department of Agriculture, has distributed more than 5,000 computers to underserved communities. Our partnership with Savannah State University's Citizens Advisory Project and Teaching Radiation, Energy, and Technology Workshop to educate kindergarten through 12th grade teachers and local community leaders near the Savannah River site about radiation, effects of radiation on environmental health, and the negative impact of environmental radiation exposure to humans. We also have access to the National Nuclear Security Administration's Dr. Massey Chairs of Excellence program. The chairs are a team of national and international expert environmental scientists and engineers from 12 historically Black colleges and universities and one Hispanic serving institution. The chairs are the technical experts providing assistance to EJ communities and tribal populations around DOE site. There are many activities, but these are a few that I wanted to highlight. One lasting and ongoing success of the implementation of the executive order is that its goals and principles have been institutionalized as federal policy, representing a profound institutional transformation. This institutionalization has occurred within individual federal agencies and across the executive branch of the federal government. So, in closing, the department is committed to pioneering new and innovative techniques to continue the implementation and advancement of environmental justice, and we are excited about the next chapter in advancing the new executive orders. While environmental justice is not a law, it must be codified. EJ is not a one-size-fits-all. The relationship between EJ and health disparities can be summed up as commitment, fairness, and collaboration through educational, motivating, and innovative initiatives. These priorities are critical to advancing the nation's energy and security goals, strengthening our economy, and providing a safe and healthy environment for minority populations and low-income populations, American Indian tribes, and Alaska Natives. Our goal is to achieve environmental justice and foster non-discrimination programs that substantially affect human health and the environment. After all, whether a person stays safe from environmental hazards should not be determined by skin color or financial worth. And environmental justice should not be determined by your zip code. Unfortunately, this type of discrimination is all too real. Proponents of environmental justice fear the resulting health disparities, unfair differences in health outcomes rooted in systemic problems such as racism and poverty may be killing us. Environmental justice is a key factor in shaping community health, well-being, and productivity. However, barriers to equality persist, in part due to our nation's history of racial discrimination. That history continues to allow the enactment of environmental policy decisions that ignore the very people whose health and well-being are at stake. Here are some of the issues that define what environmental justice is today. The bottom line, as the environment becomes increasingly toxic, vulnerable populations face the highest risk. The path forward is clear. Public health leaders and policymakers must join forces to ensure a healthy future and a healthy planet. Such an example is the leadership we are experiencing here today with this Environmental Justice Braintrust led by Congressman James Clyburn and other members of this panel. So I leave you with my favorite quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It really all boils down to this. All life is interrelated. We are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Melinda, for your comments. And my name is Harold Mitchell. I'm the founder and executive director of the Regenesis Community Development Corporation in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I served in the South Carolina House of Representatives for 13 years. I'm a current member of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I want to thank Congressman Clyburn and the Braintrust for this year's focus on connecting health disparities and environmental justice. This is something that for too long, we were warned that the storm was coming. The environmental justice movement, they said should reckon with the disproportionate effects of environmental contamination from petrochemical facilities, landfills, waste incinerators, oil refineries, smelters, freeways, and on low-income residents and communities of color. Environmental justice activists who worked in these communities are not surprised that the hardest hit populations are found in and around those that were in these polluted communities. And so this year, with the focus being on the connection between health disparities and environmental justice, is one that's kind of hitting it hard even when I'm thinking about this, and Congressman Clyburn raising it at this moment. when we look at it, this has been something that we've talked about time and time again. And because we saw those in Washington and around the country who didn't expand Medicaid to provide access for people in communities that didn't have access with these underlying conditions that the pandemic just wreaked havoc on across the country. This is one of the things that I think that has the frustration with so many vulnerable communities. They don't have access to protective gear, but they do have access to the disparate impacts of these facilities in and around these communities. The burden that we see of not having the medical homes, where you see the obesity, the diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, asthma, as an effect of being in and around located with these particular polluting facilities. It's a path of least resistance that we know that the burden is always on the Black and brown communities. And this is how and why we saw the numbers of folks that were impacted, tested positive, and died were disproportionately higher than anywhere else in the country. Like here in South Carolina, we accounted African Americans as over 45% of the deaths, but we don't even make up 20% of the population. And you see this all over the country, these impacts of what the pandemic and COVID actually did in this year. The community where I'm from, we actually have the 2 Superfund sites, 4 brownfield sites that has impacted our community. But the saving grace here is our federally qualified health center that we have that provided the medical home for folks to have that type of care and manage some of these diseases. But in other places where there was absolutely no access, you could see those zip codes clearly showing the impacts in those particular communities. And that's why I'm happy to see that this administration has taken a focus on concentrating on environmental justice. And, President Biden, what he has been able to do of creating and listening to those on the ground and being able to bring those same folks that he listened to have such a focus in and on environmental justice and creating his White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, to where, not only creating this and, as he stated, wanting to get it right, but he listened to the folks and created a plan, not in a vacuum, but he listened, got on the ground around the country as candidate Biden, and he kept that promise. And today we see that with the release of the Justice 40 interim guidance that was released last week. Over 75% of the recommendations that came from frontline leaders are actually in that guidance. And as Melinda Downing stated with the Department of Energy, that's one of those agencies where this commitment across the board will be able to reach these communities. And the biggest thing that I think too out of this is defining disadvantaged communities and focusing resources in those disadvantaged areas with 40% investment. Now, if you look at that and what we've gone through in this pandemic, that's something that I think is key to where many did not have access. Providing 40% to disadvantaged communities, we're still going through this pandemic. Even those that tested positive, those that are coming out are still seeing the effects. I myself, I suffered 65 days with COVID. And even now today, after almost a year being free, I'm still seeing those same impacts because of my kidneys. I'm having chronic impacts with my kidneys till this day. And it's due to, testing positive, in which we see many folks that are the after effects of COVID. This is something that doctors, even my doctor told me, he's like, this is something we don't know. We don't know what we're doing here with this disease. It mutates on its own. And, we're going to feel the effects from this for some time. And this is where, those effects are in those communities of color who have been impacted by what folks have talked about for some time, the disproportionate impact of air and water pollution. And this is why it's important with this administration to focus on 40%, because this is where we can get those federally qualified health centers implemented into those areas where people don't have access to care. This is what I'm hopeful for, is that we can use the model of the interagency working group to get out into these communities to be able to provide access to care. Because what we're seeing now, even with the after effects of COVID, is behavioral health and mental health. That impact of being isolated for a year, we're seeing kids, even here in South Carolina, that are suffering from what they call the emotional tics. And that's, socially not being around other kids and students that they would normally be with. We're seeing that. We're seeing it with adults as well. These behavioral and mental health problems, following this pandemic. But that's one of the things that, as a federally qualified health center, part of that group that Melinda Downing stated, one of the agencies, HHS, we can get these federally qualified health centers new access point grants awarded into these communities. And like here in Spartanburg, we were able to do that with an HBCU, Texas Southern University, who actually came in, did the health consultation, because we didn't trust ATSDR when they told us that the chemicals and the pollution basically stops at the fence line. And we knew that wasn't true. And so working with Texas Southern, we were able to come in and do this survey. And that data was actually, it caused us to be the top awardee for a new access point grant in Spartanburg. And one of the great things about an FQHC is that we know that our communities, these impacted communities, it's one thing to get to the doctor, but you're having to rob Peter to pay Paul and figure out whether you're going to get your prescription drugs or pay your rent or your light bills. But with an FQHC, the 340B pharmacy program discounts those drugs at 50%. So this is something that we definitely and desperately need into the communities that Melinda stated, these communities that have been assaulted for some time. And as many of the activists have stated, tried to warn, talked about the impacts, and look who ends up with the brunt of this pandemic. Is those in the zip codes, like in Cancer Alley, the Black Belt throughout the South, even those in the Northeast that you see in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio. These are the communities where you see those numbers. Indian country, the reservations, COVID didn't leave any stone unturned of those that were disproportionately impacted. So I just want to thank Congressman Clyburn and the Brain Trust for raising this issue, keeping it on the forefront, and for Cedric Richmond, that's in the administration, advising the president as he's doing so excellent right now. It's kind of like we're seeing the silver lining right now, because the president kept his word first and foremost, listening to those on the ground, the fence line folks on the ground that are being impacted, created a plan and brought folks to the White House on this White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council to still make sure that he and his administration gets it right. So I just want to thank the administration, the Brain Trust, Congressman Clyburn, and Mr. Richmond for keeping the president honest. But right now, we need help in these communities, and we need Congress to act. We need to pass and fund this administration so that those commitments can be kept into these communities and provide the type of health care that many of these communities deserve. So I just want to thank my panelists that I'm joined here with today, and thank the Brain Trust once again. And I yield back to you, Mr. Watchman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell, and good morning. Thank you, Congressman Jim Clyburn. Yes, it's been a long time. And so I'm Derek Watchman from Arizona, and I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. And today I'm a professional service consultant. I advise on gaming and economic development, and I'm involved in many, many community issues. And so as a congressman was talking, it reminded me of how I got started with this environmental justice roundtable. I actually years ago was the tribal affairs director working for the Department of Energy, working with Bill Richardson, and I was approached by the U.S. EPA about this very issue, and that is environmental justice. And so, being the tribal lead for the Department of Energy, we decided to put together a roundtable actually out in New Mexico. And I look at the dates as roughly August of 2000. And the turnout actually was a success. We had, and Melinda was there, and she was very helpful. And the whole team, David Rivers from the Medical University of South Carolina and others, and my colleagues over at the U.S. Department of EPA, excuse me. The issue then was the reservation locations, and from an environmental justice standpoint, and we, how do we as the U.S. Department of Energy serve tribes? And so it brought to light many issues, including the Cold War legacy, uranium, many reservations, including the Navajo Nation, were spots where uranium was mined and then just abandoned. And so today, many reservations, including the Navajo Nation, are still dealing with uranium cleanup. And so, but from what I'm hearing today, Indian country, and albeit, I'm a member of the Navajo Nation, I can't say I represent Indian country, but I would like to speak on many of the issues that affect my people and the people here in the country. For many of you that don't know, there's roughly 574 federally recognized tribes around the country. And I think many of Americans don't know that. When I look at the 2020 census, roughly 7,000 Native Americans, and this includes reservations in the lower 48, the Alaska Natives, roughly 7 million Native Americans in this country, which is roughly only 2%, but a rich part of our society. And in the last few years, I really been, getting schooled on Indian country, history, and everything to bear that impacts us as Native people. But for me, the good thing is that there's 574 reservations, 6 million strong. And we've been here for generations, and really have been trying to suggest that we have to live in harmony as a member of the Navajo Nation. As a Navajo, one of the beliefs that we're taught is that it's not just us. We live in an environment where you have Mother Earth, you have Father Sky. It's all a part of us. So we have to live in harmony. Now the harmony has been broken. So we're dealing with things like, for example, climate change. We're dealing with massive changes in the earth, and that's just because we're not living in harmony with our natural beings. And so, but from an environmental justice standpoint, I'm not sure where to start, but in Indian country, there's so many health disparities, so many disparities in general. And so, but I'd like to commend the White House, the Biden-Harris administration, for putting Indian country at the table. I think that's where it starts. So I'm delighted to see a lot of brothers and sisters who have been appointed to different federal agencies, some Native Americans that are now sitting at the White House, to be a part of policy that impacts Indian country. Where reservations, in my opinion, have been a great thing for Native Americans. And I say that because it has kept Native Americans intact. My reservation, my people, we still speak the language of Navajo, which I think is very, very important. We still believe in the practices. And I see that with many of our brothers and sisters around Indian country. And so I just want to thank the White House for bringing Indian country to the table. Now, COVID-19, it really brought to light many of the desperate conditions. Here on Navajo, for example, because of limited infrastructure, limited water, no electricity, the percentage of the COVID rates hit us very, very hard. I lost, some dear friends, a couple aunts to the COVID-19. And I think that could have been prevented. If we had access to water, access to electricity. The uniqueness of reservations has created a lot of challenges where here on Navajo, as an example, roughly 30,000 of our members, there's about 200,000 that live on the reservations. There are 400,000 registered Navajos in the world, but here on the reservation, 30,000 of our members just don't have access to running water. And what's the reason for that? There's many reasons. And so, but the fact that that exists, that created the higher COVID-19 rates here in this area. And so it's been devastating. But some of the things that I know Navajo and other tribes and my brothers and sisters around the country are dealing with, of course, is health, access to health. Many reservations are I'll say captive to the Indian Health Service because of treaty responsibilities. Many reservations, with many square miles, have only one healthcare facility. We do have education challenges, water challenges, electricity challenges, infrastructure challenges, housing, jobs. And the point of that is that we have a long way to go. When I look at studies out in the country, it says that Indian country, for the most part, is about 30 years behind. 30 years behind in terms of development and being at the same level as average America. And so I guess the question is, how do we make these improvements, and how do we bring equality, and how do we bring justice to Indian country? And I've been working years since 2000 to address that. And so, but I think being at the table with leaders like Congressman Jim Clyburn and my congressional leadership here on the reservation, Senator Sinema, Senator Kelly, Senator Heinrich, and Senator Benry Lujan, and of course our congressional delegation, O'Halloran. We also have Teresa Ledger Fernandez, and so they've been very helpful in trying to address the conditions not only here on Navajo, but in Indian country. Environmental justice for me is something that I think my family lives by, and what we've been trying to do, as a family and as a people, is to say, we have to be in concert with, our surroundings. We have to be humble, we have to be respectful, and we have to learn, and we have to reach out and seek help. Environmental justice today, because of COVID, has really been highlighted. And so, some of the things that I've seen recently, like, for example, I know President Biden issued a consultation, executive order, and I think that's really good. Consultation means basically all the agencies, including the Department of Energy, have sat down with tribal leaders and said, okay, we need to hear from you. What are the biggest concerns? And for me, unfortunately, the list is so long. How do you prioritize, and how do you address all the issues that need to be addressed here in Indian country? Climate change has really been a big issue. We're facing in the West and here on Navajo severe drought, and the drought has created a lot of problems. Here on Navajo, many of us still live and produce livestock. We still have situations where we have to go to a windmill to get water to drink. And so the drought has certainly highlighted the need for, how do you address, drought, how do you address climate change? We don't know. And so, but the point of what I'm trying to say here is that I am happy to be at the table. I'm so happy that my fellow tribal leaders, tribal chairs, tribal governors around the country have been asked to be a part of solving the problem. The CARES Act and the ARPA funding has certainly brought some resources, and will be bringing resources to Indian country. I don't think it's enough, though. I think, a lot more is needed, certainly. And so Indian country, for the most part, is a survivor. I went to a conference last week out in Nevada regarding economic development. And the theme that I heard there was that Indian country, Indian people are resilient, and we have. if you look at the policies that have been created by the federal government relating to Indian country, it's been severe damaging. Despite, the Indian country policy, Indian country has been resilient. And so we have great, great Indian leaders out there. My brothers and sisters are doing great work and great job. And so I'm glad to see that they're part of it. So I want to thank Congressman Jim Clyburn for giving me the opportunity, to speak here and to, for the most part, represent Indian country. There's great people here. Housing, as I said, has been a big problem. And so I'm sitting here thinking, where do I start and where do I end? And the list is so long, but for me, I want to say I appreciate the time being here. I appreciate the attention. I appreciate Indian country being included at all the federal agencies, including the Department of Energy, US EPA, the White House. And I think there's great Native people in our country to be at the table. And so I'm glad to see that. I was a part of it 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and I'm glad to see our young ones. What I've been taught as a Navajo is that, we have to think, and they say this in Indian country, we have to think 7 generations beyond us. It's not just about us, but it's for our children, our grandchildren, their children, way down the road. We have to think of, when we think about policy, we have to think of the impacts 7 generations down the road. And when you think about it, I think that's good teaching. And so it's not about today, but rather in the future. Our leaders in the past, for many reasons, had visions. They said, okay, like when the Constitution was put together, when the treaties were put together, there was some wisdom said, you know what? We have to go with this because they saw the future. The future is now, and the future will be tomorrow. And so, that's something I think we have to keep in our minds. And so, but I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus's Environmental Braintrust. I've been a part of it for many years. It has allowed me and allowed any country to elevate, our issues. And so we just want to continue to be included, to be a part of the program. There's a lot of resources that we believe will be available for any country. And so we just want to continue to work together. So I want to say thank you on behalf of Indian country, and thank you from Navajo, myself here in Window Rock. And so I look forward to a great session. So thank you everybody for your time. And in Navajo, aheha, which means thank you. So thank you everybody.